What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fed Up Church. I'm Sean Finney, and today we're going to be going through Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Last week we picked up with Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and kind of kicked it off. It's the book that's titled The Preacher. Ecclesiastes means preacher. And as we were going through that, we started to really see Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, paint this picture of if the viewpoint is that there is no eternity, that nothing after this life matters, then can we say that God matters? He doesn't argue whether or not God exists, mind you. He's specifically approaching this from the perspective of, does God matter? And if not, then where do we derive our meaning and our value and our sense of purpose? So we're going to pick up this week with Ecclesiastes chapter 2. I'll be reading from the New King James Version. If you have an NIV, ESV, KJV, doesn't really matter. Use whatever version you have and follow along. Let's get started. Now let's dig into Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and hear what the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, or preacher, or king of Israel. He had many different titles, and he kind of filled many different roles, and we'll see that as we go through, as he pulls from those experiences. But let's see what he has to say in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. It says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. There's that word again. We're seeing vanity. If you remember from chapter 1, he kept saying, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity meaning useless or worthless, something of no value. So we're seeing here, he's picking up right away from the very beginning. Now, chapter 1 focused on what value does wisdom offer. If you remember, Solomon talked about wanting to learn wisdom, madness, and folly. Study from all of it. And if you really think about it, those three, wisdom, madness, and folly, or you could say folly, madness, and wisdom, are three specific, you could say, types of people, or you can view it from the perspective that Solomon's viewing it, which is they are three stages of life. The foolishness of being a child, you just don't know any better. You do things that are dangerous, you do things that are stupid because you just don't know any better. You have no fear yet. And then there's madness, the adolescent years, the early 20s, just pure madness and chaos and surviving on caffeine. And then you get to a point where you become that wise old sage that people come to for advice. But it takes a lot of experience to get there. So he's saying here, I said in my heart. So he set out in chapter 1 to learn as much as he could, because the other thing we have to remember from the previous week, wisdom does not mean smarts. It doesn't mean knowledge, right? Wisdom and knowledge are two different things. And if you remember, what's the thing that separates wisdom from knowledge? Knowledge is the attainment of information, right? We take information, we learn it, and it becomes our knowledge. But it doesn't become wisdom until we actually apply it in our lives. So wisdom is the application of knowledge. In other words, Solomon still had to go and learn everything. When God gave him wisdom, he gave him the ability to learn anything and to be able to connect the dots faster than anyone else. And he could apply it in a way that was better than anyone else. Now, if you remember, he didn't ask God for wisdom. He asked for an understanding heart to lead his people. So in asking for an understanding heart to be able to lead his people, to be able to discern between good and bad, God said the answer for that is wisdom. And that's the case too, still today. If you want an understanding heart and you want to be able to relate to people and lead people and be able to discern between what's good and what's bad advice for them, the answer to that is wisdom. And that takes time, that takes experience. And thankfully we have all of Solomon's life up to this point giving us that experience here in Ecclesiastes. So he said, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. I'm going to test my heart with happiness. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to push it to its limits. That's a... You don't hear this kind of language anywhere else in the Bible. Like, I'm going to have the best time I can possibly have and see if my heart can take it. That's how you get a heart attack that way, especially as an old man. But he's saying here, this is the folly, madness, wisdom, kind of these stages that he's gone through in his life. Come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. So no meaning came from that either. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? So we're correlating here madness with laughter. The things that make you laugh often are the things that are just off the wall crazy, and you can't help but laugh, right? So there's a correlation between madness, especially this stage of life where everything's funny, right? The adolescent teens, there's a reason why we say we have the sense of humor of like a 12-year-old. Like I have the sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy half the time, right? Because it's pure madness. So he said of laughter, madness. But then he says, what does it accomplish? What purpose does that serve? Yeah, it's good, right? And laughter is a great medicine. It's a great tonic. Laughter makes the heart glad. But he's saying, what good does that do? Does that give your life meaning? Because you can laugh from the day you're born to the day you die, but at the end of it, if you still die, what did all the laughter do? It didn't save you. What's the point? He says in verse 3, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I find that interesting. So he set out on this mission. I'm going to test the limits of what my heart can handle on happiness and joy and pleasure and fun. And he even goes on to say that I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine. Now you have to keep in mind something here too. There's a reason why Jesus' first miracle is turning water into wine, right? Because in Isaiah, God says that we as men have turned the joy of the relationship we have with him into water. We've diluted the wine. We've taken the joy out of the relationship. And in ancient Israel, it was always symbolic for joy. And that's why it had to be, at a wedding, you had to be able to provide wine for everybody. You had to be able to give everybody enough wine. And keep in mind, they didn't just put it on a little party for a few small guests, friends and family. A marriage celebration the entire town came out for. And it lasted a week. And you had to be able to keep all these people well fed and well liquored up with wine. So they got to drink as much as they wanted. If you ran out of wine, it meant that the marriage was doomed, right? That was a superstition at the time, that the marriage wasn't going to succeed because it ran out of joy. It ran out of wine. Well, God says we've done that to the relationship, the marriage he has with his people, right? Us, is that we've diluted the wine with water. We've mixed wine with water, removing some of the joy from it. So this is why when Jesus came, the New Testament covenant, he came in his first miracle was turning water into wine. And that is symbolizing he is putting back in to the relationship that we have with God, the joy that was supposed to be there. We doled it down and we diluted it with religion and tradition and rules, and none of that was meant to be in there. And we lost the joy. Jesus came to restore the joy. Jesus came that our joy may be full, like a cup, right? It runs over. This is connecting any dots for you. This is what it was referring to. So he's saying here, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine while guiding my heart with wisdom. So while guiding my heart with wisdom, drink wine. In other words, I didn't drink it to the point where wisdom was no longer there and I could no longer discern between right and wrong, or could no longer discern between madness, wisdom, and folly. I guided my heart with wisdom, but poured on some of the wine, brought in some of the joy. If you focus on what he's saying here at the very beginning, come now I will test you with mirth. So I guided my heart with wisdom and sought how to gratify my flesh with wine. Like, he's trying to find the joy, trying to find the meaning, because up to this point, everything he is finding is that it's all meaningless and it's pointless. Caveat to that, he's approaching this from the perspective, if you remember from chapter 1, he's approaching it from the perspective of what's the meaning of life if there's no afterlife, if there's no eternity beyond what we do here. So bear that in mind. But he's saying, I searched my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly. How do I get a hold of foolishness? Which would be very difficult for somebody whose God-given gift was wisdom. To lay a hold of foolishness. You could do foolish things, but in order to really lay a hold of that folly, you have to not know what it is that you're doing. So this was something that was very frustrating for Solomon to try to understand. And he talks about it frequently, that it might have just been better to be a fool than to be wise, because then it's better off if you just don't know. Ignorance is bliss. So he seeks how to lay a hold of that folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. God gives us this time period on earth. What's good to do while we're here? Does any of it make a difference? Does any of it matter? If you're going to leave God out of the equation and approach this from a purely scientific perspective and psychological perspective, which is what the preacher is doing here, this is what Solomon's doing, then is there anything that we could do that is good? And by good, he's referring to something that gives us value and meaning and purpose in our lives, and something that's not just vanity of vanities. It's all vain. It's all useless. He said in verse 4, I made my works great. So we're going to hear a little bit of his experience now. I made my works great. I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. What's the purpose of planting vineyards? So you have plenty of grapes, right? To make wine. Plenty of joy. He planted them himself. He built houses. Which literally he built houses. But then he also built his house. If you think about it. The history of Solomon. You know, we use this phrase, right? Like, this is my house. I built this house. Like, I did this on my own. And he's talking about, like, I built houses. Not just for me. Like, I built many houses. I built houses for other people. Using my wisdom to be able to guide them and help them. He goes, I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. And I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. So, okay, yep, I had the orchards, the vineyards. I built the houses on them. I planted trees so the fruit would grow. I even took care of, like, the watering and the irrigation system, because I'm wise. I'm taking care of it all. And then he says, I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. In other words, I was smart. I didn't just get, all male servants. I got male and female servants, and then they would be able to, and really this is rendered elsewhere in other translations as slaves. And he says, like, I got male slaves, I got female slaves, and they would get together, and I would have a continual supply of slaves. This is, he's going to come back to this, and he's going to point back to this as all of this did not get him what he was looking for. He still didn't get what he was asking for out of life, absent any kind of eternity, if it's just everything under the sun. Because remember, that's what he said. I was looking for an answer to what was good for the sons of men under the sun. Like, in other words, under the sun, not in heaven, but under this, like, on here, on this earth, while we're here. He says, yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. The exact meaning of musical instruments is unknown. This word only ever occurs once here in the Bible in Hebrew, and nowhere else can we find a reference to it. So it's a guess. When they say musical instruments of all kind, it's kind of a guess. But the most similar word that you'll find is actually an Egyptian word that looks very similar. It's used in a similar context, and it means concubines. So really, given that what he's talking about here, which is chapter 1's all about, wisdom, trying to derive value and meaning to your life out of wisdom. Chapter 2 is all about wealth, wine, and women. So really he's trying, okay, I tried this too. And he'll give us that conclusion. He said at the very beginning, the first verse or two, it was all vanity. So even that didn't get me what I was looking for. But he says here, I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments, or concubines. This is also the guy who had 700 wives and 400 concubines, of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So I built an awesome house. I built many houses, all these orchards, all these vineyards. I did all this stuff. My wisdom stayed with me the entire time. And yet that still didn't get me what I was looking for. He says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Whatever I saw that I wanted, I gave in. So this is definitely this period of life, madness, right? This is what I would refer to as madness. The 20s, whatever you want, it's all good. You do you. You only live once. How many of these slogans and sayings have we heard over the years? And there's always a new one. And I don't even know what the newest one is. I'd have to ask my kids. But leave it in the comments if you know what it is. So he's like, I gave everything. If I saw it and I wanted it, I indulged. This is a life of indulgence at this point. He said, I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, none whatsoever. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. So in other words, I will be happy to do the work. I will work hard, and I will play harder. And this is the mentality of a lot of people that I know today. I mean, you know them too. Actually, I would even go venture as far to say that, gee, that's my mentality half the time too. I will work hard, but then I need to play hard too. Because I deserve it. This is the perk of working this hard, right? That's the whole point. Why would we just toil along all the time if there was never any benefit to it? So he's saying, whatever I saw that I wanted, I gave in. I didn't withhold anything from my heart that it wanted to do. We went ahead and did it because I worked hard, and this is the reward for all my labor. Verse 11, he says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had done. I looked at everything I had built, and on the labor in which I had toiled. Now, he previously talked about this in verse 10, saying, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. I was happy to do it. I was happy to do all this labor. My heart rejoiced in it. And from verse 10 to verse 11, this slight distinction's made. He says, I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled. The word toiled literally means wasted my time doing, trivial tasks. I toiled all these days away building all this. I was happy to do it, but at the end of the day, I look back on it and it's just labor in which I toiled. And indeed, all was vanity and grasping for the wind. He's using that phrase again. It was all vanity and grasping for the wind. You can't quite catch it. No matter what you do, you can't really catch it with your hands. You can build all this stuff with your hands, But he's saying, I looked at all that stuff that I built, all the work my hands had done, and what it really was me trying to grasp at the wind. There was no profit under the sun. Profit, like Profit, profit as in like money, right? Or benefit. So he's like, I did all of this. I pursued wisdom. I pursued madness. I pursued folly. I pursued every possible pleasure you can imagine. I indulged in all of it. I never held back. I tried making my heart merry with wine. I've tried doing all of this, and it was all vanity, and there was no profit under the sun. In other words, like, no matter what you do, it doesn't pay dividends. It's not worth doing if the only reason you do any of this is for the benefit that you will get out of it in this life under the sun. Because if that's the case, it doesn't make you live any longer. You end up dead too. So what's the point? If the only reason you're doing it is for self-gratification, pleasure in this moment, in this life. Verse 12, he says, Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. So at that point, then I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. So I looked at all the stuff I'd done. I built all these great things, and there was no profit in it. I still didn't get what I desired, which was meaning and purpose out of it. A sense of purpose. A sense of it'll pay off. It has a meaning somewhere along the line. I didn't get any of that from that. So at that point, he says, Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Now, this is a pretty bold statement. He's saying, what can a man do who succeeds the king? He is the king. And there will be a man that comes after him to take his place when he dies. And he's saying, and what can that man do that I haven't already done? Because I have literally done everything. I have done it all. You cannot name something that'll shock and surprise me. I have done it all. Mind you, this is also the guy whose title is preacher. And that's why I think a lot of the best preachers I have ever actually heard or studied under were men who could see more of themselves in the people that were coming down the aisle to, meet them than they did in the people that were in the choir. They were able to see more of themselves in the people who were broken and dealing with addiction and dealing with hardship and dealing with illness. They could see more of themselves in that person. Therefore, they could reach them. You're not going to shock them because, yeah, I've done that too. I've done this too. And that's what Solomon is saying. This preacher here is saying, I've done all of these things. Nothing you can say that's going to shock me. What's the next king going to be able to do that I haven't already done? It's already all been done. So he says, for what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. I've already did it. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly. So wisdom's better than foolishness. He sees this. Mind you, the only reason he can see this is because he's wise. So it's kind of circular. He says, I see that wisdom excels folly or foolishness as light excels darkness. Think about that for a minute. Wisdom is like light. He's saying, and it's better to have light than to have darkness. Darkness is not a thing in and of itself, right? What is darkness? Define it. Darkness is simply the absence of light. So folly or foolishness is the absence of wisdom. It's the absence. It's not just making bad decisions. It's literally the wisdom's not there. Yeah, they don't know any better because it's not there. They're not wise. They don't have the experience to back it up. They haven't learned. So they are unlearned, hence folly, foolishness. It's better to be learned and know what's going on than not. At least that's what he's saying right here. And we'll kind of see him kind of maybe consider both perspectives back and forth throughout the entire book. He says, the wise man's eyes are in his head. Isn't everyone's? Your eyes are in your head. But the fool walks in darkness. Oh, that's what he's talking about. So it has nothing to do with your eyes literally being in your head. He's saying a wise man's eyes are in his head, like in his brain, in his mind. He sees through logic and reasoning and critical thinking, whereas a fool walks in darkness. They don't see anything at all because they're not applying logic and reasoning and critical thinking and life experiences and trying to learn. They're not trying to do anything differently. They're just doing things and having bad outcomes and don't really care. It is what it is, which is a horrible phrase, but I hear it all the time. Is what it is. Really? Or is it that way because of the way you're looking at it? Your point of view, your perspective. And could it be a different way if you consider somebody else's perspective? You might not be right all the time. And in order for you to get that, in order for you to see that, you have to be able to understand things from other people's point of view. He's saying, but a fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all. The wise sage and the foolish idiot all have the same thing happen to them. Verse 15, so I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. He's talking about death, the one thing that happens to us all, the one thing we all have in common. We all die. So if you have somebody who's a fool and just blindly going through life in the darkness, but most of the time happy, right? This is the reason why he's wise and he had to try happiness. And he said it in the last chapter that with much wisdom comes much sorrow. So it's nothing but grief and vexation of spirit. This is what he was saying last chapter. The more you know, the more sorrows you have. So a lot of people struggle with this, right? A lot of people struggle with things like, constant depression and things like, and really we blame the news and we blame the media for like driving, depression, and people are like, oh, it's always going to be a war. It's always depressing. You turn on the news and it's never good news, right? It's always just bad news. It's the one thing that starts, the 6 p.m. news or 11 o'clock news is the only thing that starts off by saying good evening and then telling you why it isn't. So the whole point of that, I don't think it's the news that leads to people being in a state of depression and in a funk, right? It's what's going on. You're more informed about things that are going on in the world. Now, I'm not a fan of the mainstream media, and yeah, they twist it, and finding anyone to give you just straight facts anymore is very difficult. But at the same time, a lot of like what's going on right now in Ukraine and Russia, yeah, that's terrifying and that's scary for the people that are going through that. And, we pray for them. But at the same time, if you had no idea that was going on, you could have been going about your merry way, oblivious, and having a great Tuesday or whatever. That's what Solomon is saying. He's like, the more you know, the more sorrows you have, because the more you see how screwed up everything is. And here he said, if it's the same with the fool as it is with the wise one, with me, the wisest man that ever lived, if it's the same with an idiot who doesn't know any better, and then he's going to die, and then I die just the same, then why did I waste all this time studying and learning to have a life of sorrow just to experience the same fate? If all there is ends at the grave, it ends in the dirt. He said, this also is meaningless. It's pointless. It's vanity. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, right? So if there's no more remembrance of the wise compared to the fool forever, like 1,000 years later, the irony of this is we remember Solomon. We don't really remember him. We have his writings. We know who he was. And as a king, like any kings, they kind of go down in history. But If you think about it, nobody just walks around and randomly goes, "Oh, I miss Solomon." Like that's what he's saying. Like at no point does it really matter, because the wise man and the fool both are going to die. Both are going to be forgotten. What was the point of going through all of this hard labor and work and trying to learn and study and become the wisest man that ever lived? So, verse 16, he continues saying, "Since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come, and how does a wise man die? As the fool." Take this two ways. How does a wise man die? It's a question he's asking. And he's asking his audience, right, that he's preaching to. This is a sermon he's giving. And he's saying, I did all of this, experienced all the pleasures and joys that you could possibly do, right? I was the wisest man, I was the richest man, I was the king of Israel. Like, nothing. I held back nothing. And I didn't get meaning out of that. And then I tried pursuing wisdom and madness and folly and everything and all these, trying to understand everything from every perspective. And that was vanity. Got nothing out of that. There was no profit under any of the work under the sun. So if God's not part of the equation, if eternity doesn't exist, then what's it matter? Because how does the wise man die? As the fool. He didn't say like, oh, just as the fool does. We both die the same. He's now changing the perspective. And he's now saying, how does the wise man die? As the fool. He dies as the fool. He is the fool when he dies. Because in all of his wisdom, in all of that pursuit of knowledge, and the full understanding of all the scientific disciplines, he studied everything. If you come to the conclusion that the only thing that matters is what's under the sun, what's in the world that you can see, and what's going on, there's no eternity, there's nothing to be concerned of, that God does not matter. This is what he's coming back to. So it was the most important question he was asking throughout the entire first chapter and the whole book. Not if God's real, but does he matter? Because if he doesn't matter, then I've lived my life this way, I've done this, and I became wise. And so a wise man ends up dying as a fool for having not known whether or not God matters. Verse 17, he said, therefore I hated life. I hated life. I hated life because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me. For all is vanity and grasping for the wind. He's saying it again. All is vanity and grasping for the wind. I hated life because all the work was distressing, right? All the work is intense. All the work was stressful. It was all this labor, all this heartache, all this hardship. And what was the purpose and the value in it? You know, people say, well, life sucks and then you die, right? That's his perspective. That's what he's approaching this from. Is if that's all there is that life sucks and then you die, I hate life. Like, this is a sick, twisted game that I don't want to play. And that's what he's coming to at this point. And he says here in verse 9 and verse 18, he says, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun. So at first he goes, I hated life. The more you know, the more sorrows, all this hard work, I hated life. Now he says, I hated all the work I did too. But he previously said I did it with a happy heart. But now looking back on it, if that meant nothing, then he says, I hate that too. I hated all my labor in which I toiled under the sun. Everything I did under the sun. So he's not talking about the things he did for the kingdom of heaven, things that God would reward him for later. He's not talking about any of that, because at this point, the audience he's speaking with, they're all trying to be wise. They don't necessarily believe in an afterlife or an eternity or God, or they may be agnostic, right? Because that's kind of what he's teaching to, is these agnostic people who, yeah, I believe that there may be a God, but I'm not going to argue that point. He goes, well, does that matter? Does he matter? If God's real, does he matter? We'll assume he's real. What value does he have? That's what the preacher is trying to get them to answer, to reason through. So he says, then I hated all my labor which I toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Yeah. Can't take it with you. I mean, the Egyptians tried, right? They had an entire, pyramids built, and, the sarcophagus was filled with... Can't take it with you. No matter how hard you try, you can't take it with you. He's like, so I hated all the work because I did all this hard work, and at the end of the day, I don't get to keep it. Somebody else gets to take it. The guy who comes after me gets to take what I worked hard for. As verse 19 says, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Now that's funny. Like, you worked so hard to become so wise, to build houses and plant orchards and vineyards and fruit trees and irrigation systems, and you worked so hard to be so wise just to die as a fool, and the fool coming behind you didn't have to lift a finger to do anything. He just gets it all. So who really is the wise one, right? Wouldn't it be smarter just to not try to be smarter? To just be the fool? That's the question he's asking. And it's a valid point. It's a valid question. And he says, yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Concerning yourself with what happens to all your crap after you die. Vanity. It's meaningless, it's pointless. That doesn't matter either. The answer doesn't lie there either. And he says, therefore, I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. So I hated life. I hated the work. And then I hated all the results of the work that I got, because now it's going to be taken by whoever comes after me. It's not even mine to keep. Now I hate it too. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. Yet he must leave his heritage, or his inheritance, right, to a man who hasn't labored for it. We call those children. Right? They haven't done the work for it. And you don't get to take it with you. So he says, this also is vanity and a great evil. Now, what does the word evil mean? And this is important, and because we have this misnomer of what the word evil means. And I see it all the time in churches. I see it all the time in the way people read scriptures and they interpret things, and then they get really confused because they don't know what the word evil means. Because when God said, they would eat of the tree and then they would have the knowledge of good and evil, the word evil means harmful. It doesn't mean sinister. It doesn't mean satanic, right? It doesn't mean anything other than literally harmful. So they would be like us, knowing good, what's healthy, what's good for you, and harmful, what's bad for you, what hurts you. So when we talk about Satan being evil, and we talk about God being good, God is good, right? God wants what's best for you. Whereas Satan, he wants what's best for himself at the expense of you. And in making it at the expense of you, it harms you. That is evil. That's what the word means. So here he's saying that a man who labors his entire life and works and builds up and amasses his wealth, only to die and have to leave it to somebody else who did not labor for it, who didn't lift a finger for it, had nothing to do with it. He says this is vanity, it's meaningless, and it's a great evil. It's a great harm. How's that a harm if I inherit, $30 million and, mansions and estates, and I'm going to think that's great because I didn't have to do anything to earn that. And Solomon, the wisest preacher, the wisest man, he says this is a great evil. It's a great harm. It'll be a great harm to that man because he doesn't know what it took to build it. He doesn't know what it takes to run and maintain it, and he won't know how to keep it. And if you don't know how to build it and you can't keep it, it's why you see lottery winners all the time get like $300 million Powerball prizes, and like 5 years later they're broke. or in jail. Like, their life just fell apart. The reason why they didn't have that wealth to start with is because they don't know what it takes to earn it, to maintain it, and to control it. So then they can't keep it. Your skills are what kind of level you up. So if you you build your skills up, financial management, whatever it is, then the wealth can grow, right? You can sustain more. If you sustain more, you have to have the skills to be able to see it through and not lose it all. He's saying this is a great harm to that man who just inherits all of the wealth, all the wisdom, everything I built and put together. I made a life of this. I amassed fortunes. I'm a freaking king. The man who doesn't have to earn this at all and doesn't have a clue what it's going to take to keep it, the fool that comes behind me, I just committed a great evil against this man, because he's going to have no idea how to keep it all. He's going to lose it all. And that's more tragic than if he had never had it in the first place, right? If you never had it in the first place, then you don't care. But imagine you had a winning Powerball ticket for $200 million. That's awesome. Imagine you found it they're good for 6 months. Imagine you found it on 6 months and 1 day after it was drawn, and now you can't claim it. You lost it. It's the knowledge of knowing that you had it that makes it worse, right? So here he's saying it's a great evil. It's a great evil for people just to inherit things that they don't know how to earn, because they don't have the skills to do that. So getting kind of the cart before the horse, that kind of mentality, getting the payoff first, that instant gratification without having earned it up to that point. It's not about, you need to earn it so you can prove yourself. No, it's you need to build the skill set in order to be able to maintain this. Because the goal should be able to grow beyond this, not just lose it as slow as possible. Verse 22, he says, "For what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful." All his days are sorrowful. He also said that all of his days were sorrowful when he talked about the more he learned and the more wisdom and knowledge that he attained. But he's saying here that a man who inherits great wealth without having to earn it, all his days are going to be sorrowful. Then he continues on saying, "In his work burdensome." The work is going to be burdensome. It's going to be a pain. It's going to be a big burden for you because you don't know what it takes to do it. And if you don't know what it takes to do it, you're not going to be able to maintain it. And that, if you're not able to maintain it, the work's going to suck. You're going to hate the job. To running all these orchards and these estates and all of the wealth and everything that I've built up to this point. He says, "For all his days are sorrowful, his work burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity." So even people who covet after these lottery winners and all fame and fortune, no, absolutely not. The work would be burdensome to you, and you would not enjoy it. And even at night when he's sleeping, his heart doesn't get rest. Literally, the heart never stops, right? When it does, you're dead. So while it's still beating and not resting, considering everything from the first heartbeat to the last, that's what he's saying, is that the work never stops. So if you don't enjoy the work, or you don't know how to do it, great, because really what it comes down to, you do work that you enjoy. If you're in a job and you don't like it, find a different job. If you're doing a job that you enjoy, it's probably because you're good at it, right? We like the games that we play because they're the games that we're good at. We like the jobs that we do because, been doing it a while, I'm really good at this. What we are good at is what we enjoy. You don't have the skills necessary to do what it takes to maintain what I've built, is what he's saying. And because you're not going to be good at it, it's going to suck. You're not going to enjoy this. I enjoy doing this because this was my passion of my pursuit, and to learn wisdom and to madness and folly and study everything. And that's what it was going to take out of you to do it. You may not enjoy the work. And if you don't enjoy the work, I've done you a great evil, a great harm in leaving this behind for you. This also is vanity. It's meaningless. And chances are you're going to stay up all night, right? Like, that's the other side, the flip side of that coin is when the heart takes no rest. He's talking about literally, even in the night, his heart takes no rest, right? Like, you don't get a good night's sleep. At no point do you feel like you can just turn off and disengage and relax and recover and refresh yourself for the next day. It's like one long day that just keeps on going with naps in between. And there's no real satisfying rest from it all. He says nothing, in verse 24, nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink. Nothing is better for a man that he should just eat and drink. Really, that's the best thing for a man. Eat and drink. True, very true. Both vital for life. You have to eat and drink in order to survive. But he's saying, like, we're talking like feasting and wine and like just, right, eat, drink, and then later on it was added in the Bible, and be merry, right? Eat, drink, and be merry. And we'll see later on in Ecclesiastes in chapter 10, verse 19, actually, where it goes on to say, like, wine is for the gladness of heart. And he also says money answers everything, which a lot of people don't realize. They misquote the Bible. Side note, rabbit, let's chase the squirrel. So when people say money is the root of all evil, they're misquoting like 1 Timothy, so I want to say like 10:6 or something like that. That's probably, could be wrong. It's in 1 Timothy, but they're misquoting that verse where it says the love of money is the root of all evil. The love of money, not money itself, but the love of it is the root of all evil, and that's true. But when we twist it and we say money is the root of all evil, we miss the point entirely. Because Solomon says later on here in Ecclesiastes, money answers everything. Really, it comes back to you don't have the resources you need. If you look at it like a tool and you have enough tools to get the job done, it answers everything. But if you really need to put a nail into a board and you've got no tools to do that, you've got no way to answer that problem, that challenge, that task. Money is a tool. And when we remember that money is a tool and that's all, life gets a lot easier to deal with. You just, okay, I need to change what I'm doing to add more tools to my repertoire, to my tool bags that I can pull out whenever I need it. And that's how we should be pursuing this skills achievements and learning more and gaining more knowledge over time. That way we don't risk inheriting something or getting something handed to us that we have not worked for and have not earned, because that would be a great evil, a great harm to us. But he says, nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. Right? The best thing for a man, from what he can see at this point, is that you eat, drink, and enjoy your work. Get a job you enjoy doing. Make sure you eat good meals, eat, drink, and enjoy the work. So when the people say eat, drink, and be merry, Solomon said eat, drink, and go to work. Probably a good idea. As long as you're not drinking alcohol. You start drinking alcohol and go to work, it becomes a different problem entirely. Even if you'll enjoy the work, I'm sure. I don't recommend it. But he's saying that nothing's better that a man should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I expected him here to be like, this also was vanity. But this is the first time we're seeing Solomon break that pattern. He said, nothing's better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Again, he's not denying God. He's not denying that he exists. But he's saying this, for a man to eat, drink, and enjoy, for his soul to enjoy the labor of his hands, what he does, the work that he does. This is a gift from God. Consider that next time you go to work. It's not something for you to suffer through. It's something that's a gift from the hand of God. It's all about perspective. So he says, for who can eat and who can have enjoyment more than I? Right? Take his word for it. Because he can eat better than anyone else. He's got the resources, the tools, right? The money to do it. He can drink more than anyone else because, again, he's literally getting thousands of gallons of wine delivered as tribute and taxes. And he can eat and drink better than anyone else. And who can have enjoyment more than I, right? More than a king. For God gives wisdom and knowledge. See, they're two separate things, wisdom and knowledge. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, and he's using this kind of backhandedly, and to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, which was all of us. We all are sinners. We all are under the curse to toil the earth with our hands and our sweat, right? That Adam was cursed with. We all have been given this task of gathering and collecting, and that's what he is summing up his entire life's achievement as. Wisest man who ever lived said, everything I've done, I've built houses, I've built vineyards, I've done all of this, I've had all of the experiences you could possibly have, and it boils all of it down to two words: gathering and collecting. Like dust. Gathering things and collecting things. That's it. So he says, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. So that God may give to the person who is good before God. But he says this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Why? If he's saying that God gives to those that he likes, right? Those that are good. That literally is what he's saying, is that God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, he gives the work of gathering and collecting. This is a very pessimistic outlook. And remember when I told you, Ecclesiastes is a very difficult book to kind of figure out and learn and understand what's going on. And a lot of preachers will stay away from actually teaching Ecclesiastes, especially all the way through. Revelation, Ecclesiastes, they try to avoid, because it's hard to kind of explain that to somebody when you're saying, like, well, you're saying that wisdom and knowledge and joy are given by God to people that God likes. That's not what he's saying here. Think about it. There is one person, and this is what he's going to be getting to. There is one person who is good. To the sinners, we have this job of gathering and collecting, toiling our lives away. And if it ends there, then it's pointless. It's meaningless, and it's grasping after the wind. But there is something bigger than the wind that we need to latch onto, that we need to grab a hold of. There is one person, and he's to come a little later here in the Bible, when we start getting into the gospel, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When we start talking about Jesus, Yeshua, there is one Savior who is good, and to that person, God gives all knowledge, all wisdom, and all joy. And we can have that, but the only way we can have that is through Christ, through him. If we're doing it on our own, it's grasping after the wind. There's a different kind of wind we are to grasp after, to chase after, to try to get a hold of. This word here, wind, this Hebrew word, wind, rûaḥ, literally means the breath, the spirit. The breath of God is rûaḥ. This is what we refer to. It's translated wind. It's translated spirit. It's translated breath. This is when God breathed out of his nostril, or breathed into Adam's nostrils, the breath of life. Rûaḥ, right? The breath of life. This is the kind of wind. He's saying it's grasping after wind. What we don't realize up to this point is, yes. And that's the point. Shift your focus from grasping after the wind of this world, and instead focus on trying to get a hold of the breath of God so that he can breathe into you knowledge and joy and wisdom, then at that point, life begins to take on some meaning. You start to feel like you have a purpose. Then it becomes valid. You get a sense of validation and joy, and your soul finds rest and happiness and satisfaction in the labor, in the work, so that your heart can rest at night. We should be pursuing after Christ. That way we're not just gathering and collecting things. We're not just pursuing achievements for the sake of trying to pursue achievements. So he's gone through the gamut here. He's gone through what he's done to try to pursue wisdom and knowledge and understanding and madness and folly and wealth and wine and women and all the wonders of the world that I could possibly offer. He's pursued it all, and he found out that there was no profit in it. There was no point in any of it. It was all meaningless. If this world is all we have, if we all die here, what's the point of any of that? It would almost be better to be a fool, right? To be an idiot and not know all that, because at least they look happy. And then he comes back to, if that's the point, it would almost be better to never have been born at all. That way you never experience any of the sorrow. Because he hated life, and then he hated the work, and then he hated the results of his work, and then he hated it more because, well, I'm just going to leave this behind for somebody to get harmed. You know, it's a great evil to them because I just took that foolish idiot, made his day, and broke his heart. It's like all in his lifetime. And that's on me for all the work I did. And we're both going to end up in the dirt. So if that's the case, then if God doesn't matter, then neither do we. That's what he's coming back to. We're going to circle around and kind of come to that point over the next few chapters. But the way he breaks this down is interesting, because he's doing it, again, like I said, from a scientific perspective. But for the first time, we've seen him really kind of point to, for a man to enjoy the labor, for you to enjoy the work, to eat, drink, and take joy in what you do, that is from the hand of God. So your daily provision, give us this day our daily bread, that's from the hand of God. The water that you need to sustain you, that's from the hand of God. The job that you do, that's from the hand of God. Solomon is saying, I know that much. Now we need to find out, is this all there is? And does God matter? From what we're seeing at this point, without God, it's depressing, it's pessimistic, it's pointless. But we're going to start to see what it starts to look like when we start to factor God into the picture. So follow us next week. If you like this or found value in this, please like, share, subscribe, turn on a little notification bell so you get the notification when we post the next one. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it or if you got any kind of value out of that. I appreciate that. That kind of lets me know if you're getting anything out of this, and it encourages me along the way as well. So I'll see you guys next week. I love you guys. Rock on. Stay strong.